we're looking at a brain right here, and that's because there are 4 elements that I believe you should include for effective testimony. Number 1, you need to convince their minds. You need to change their minds, convince their brains of the truth of what you are saying. And so, how do you do that? Well, you give them the facts, you give them the logic, you give them the reasoning, the charts, the statistics, okay? This is what makes us reasonable, because we have reasons for the things we believe. We have logical, correct reasons. We have facts. We can prove what we're saying. It's not just our own personal beliefs that are based on nothing but our own desires, okay? So convince their minds and give them the facts. But think about this for a second. How many people do you know who've ever started some kind of a diet or exercise program? A lot of people, right? Why do they start it? Because their minds are convinced that they will be helped by this, that this is going to be a good thing for them. But how often do they stop? Pretty often, right? Why do they stop? Well, I think it's because maybe their brains are still convinced, right? They haven't just changed their minds. They're not saying, oh, I now am convinced that exercise is bad for me. No, they move on to other things because they didn't prioritize it. Why? That's because there's another element, and you have to convince their hearts. You have to put a face on it. You have to put a story on it, right? Humanize it. Tell the story. Tell your story. I bet you for every single person who actually stuck with some kind of a diet or exercise program, I bet there was some kind of meaningful emotional connection to it. There was meaning in it for them, right? So maybe they're, hang on, there's a phone ring. Maybe they're preparing for a race with their sisters and they want to be able to do a great job. Maybe they're super competitive, right? And that helps. It's the emotional connection. That can be it. Maybe they're preparing for boot camp and they're going to go to the Marine Corps. Maybe their family has a history of heart problems and their grandkid was just born and they realize, I want to be around for my grandkids. But there's some kind of compelling emotional connection. And so give that to the legislators. Give that to the people you're talking about. Convince their minds, but also convince their hearts of what you're talking about. Put a face on it. Humanize it. Tell that story. A couple more elements that are important. We're looking at concrete blocks because I believe you need to make it concrete. Make your testimony concrete. Be specific about what you want. And this is especially true if you're not just saying, hey, do this bill or don't do this bill. But if you say, I like this bill and here's why. And here's why this is important. Or if you're talking to a legislator ahead of time, you say, you know what? Would you file a bill that does this thing? Or if you're talking to a legislator saying, I like your bill, but can you change it to do something else also? Can you make it a little bit better, okay? And you can do that in testimony too. You can say, it's a good bill in some ways, but I want some things changed. When you do that, be specific. I hate it when I'll sit there for 2 minutes and the person is going on and on and on and on and on about how we have to care about our kids, we have to do more for our kids, we have to care about people, and why do we not care about people? We should care about safety, we should care about mental health, we should care about these issues, and they never specifically say what they mean by that. Because you know what, it's not the legislator's job to sit there and just care about an issue, it's their job to make law. And that has to be specific, okay? So if they care about it, what then do you want them to do? I want you to make a law that does this thing. So for me, I want you to make a law that says we can carry our guns without having to have a permit, okay? So be very specific, be concrete about what you're asking them for. And the final element is to build a ramp, make it accessible. What do I mean by that? Okay, so if I was going to a friend's house and there were a couple of steps on the front porch, I probably wouldn't even notice them, right? I just walk up them without thinking because it's easy for me. What if I was in a wheelchair? Would I notice those steps? You bet I would. I probably wouldn't be able to get into that house. That might be an insurmountable obstacle without a ramp. So a lot of times for us, I feel like we've lived around our issues for so long, me for gun rights, you for whatever it is, and we know it so well that we forget what it's like to not know that issue, right? So for me, it makes perfect sense that we want to get rid of gun-free zones. We're going to be safer that way. It makes perfect sense that we want to carry without a permit. I see why it's safer. I see why we're better off. Other people may have a huge mental block for that. Maybe they believe things like I used to believe a long time ago, that guns just randomly go off. Maybe they believe that public safety is gonna be hindered if you don't have a training requirement. If they have that kind of belief, I build them a ramp. I give them the data that shows how public safety actually increases. I give them the charts. I give them the information. I tell them a story about the person that will be helped by this. Whatever that block is, I help them. What if they think their constituents don't want it? Well, I organize their constituents to all contact them so they realize that it's actually popular among their constituents. But you've got to figure out what that mental block is, why they don't want to do it, and you have to build them a ramp to help them get there to where you are. Now, you notice I'm not saying to lower yourself, to lower what you're asking for. All I'm saying is you're going to help them get there. Yeah, you can go and show up and say, you know what, just figure it out, make a way, get rid of property taxes, somehow just do it. And I don't have any problem with you doing that. But I think you're going to be more effective if you can say, we absolutely must get rid of property taxes. Here is a plan for how that works. Okay, so the more you can present to them, build them a ramp for how do you get to this thing without complete political suicide, without ruining everybody's lives. How do you make this a good thing for everybody? That helps you to be so much more persuasive. So those are the 4 tips. Again, just so you remember, convince their minds, convince their hearts, make it concrete, and make it accessible. Those are the things. The importance, the meaning, the specificity, and the accessibility. And with that, I'd love to take a few questions on any of these issues before I get into some logistics of delivering testimony. So what questions do I have?
Okay, we have a few questions. First, some of the you discussed some of the info and stuff using facts. Is there a good place? I know Gun Owners has had some things on their website before. Is there a good place to go and get some facts and stats and info that, at least on Second Amendment issues here, that we could go to and pick those things up to incorporate into our testimony?
So I think you're wondering, okay, where you can find information to put in your testimony?
Some of the different stats and facts about how numbers and things like showing how much more effective it is for crime going down and so forth for areas that have open carry or carry in general. Okay.
Specifically for gun rights, you can check out, I have activist resources up at gunownerstx.org, and there's a whole lot more. It links to resources at the full Gun Owners website. So we have a lot of resources there that point to that. I get a lot of facts and numbers from John Lotz. But this is where it really takes a thinking mind, because you can just print up a bunch of charts and you can shove it at them and say, here's why, just go do it. But that isn't really making it accessible. So this is where we need thinking minds. We need intelligent people who are willing to spend some time on this. I definitely do this for my own testimony. I put the information out there, but we need more people doing it from your perspective. So go through the data, go through the resources that I put out there at the website, and I'll throw that link up in a minute. But think about what it means, right? Pull out 1 or 2 of those facts that really are compelling. Tell a story about it. So you convince their minds with that, but you also tell a story about how this fact, what this fact means, humanize the fact, humanize the chart. So what I'd like to do is actually print up some of those charts or print up the facts and give it as written testimony. And then in my oral testimony, I might pull out one of those. One of my favorites is 97.3% of mass shootings happen in places where guns are not allowed. There's a correlation, a definite correlation between gun-free zones and shootings. And so gun-free zones obviously do not protect us from shootings. So that's one I like to use a lot.
Rachel, This is Scott. I have a question kindly from a gentleman by the name of Russell. He's a good friend. He says, I'd like to hear actual examples of how testifying to a committee versus all other contact options was more effective. Is a 3-minute testimony really more effective than all of the above? Can you please share some of your experiences that brought you to that conclusion?
Yes. At the end of the day, it's a little bit hard to comprehensively say what is the one thing that made a difference in a bill or not. Here, I'll give you a couple of examples, and I'll give you some generalities that might help you understand. So first of all, what do legislators really care about? They care about getting elected again, right? I mean, hopefully some of them also care about liberty. Hopefully some of them also care about the Constitution and the right thing. But at the end of the day, the bulk of them, what do they care about? Their elections. So what are the two most important pressure points they're going to cave to? Money and voters. Okay, so money, that means if they're donors, if I'm the kind of lobbyist who goes out and wines and dines everybody, that's a lot of money being poured. If I'm pulling in a lot of high dollar donors for them and making sure they get elected and have money for that, and then I give them a phone call and say, hey, could you please do this favor for me? They're going to listen to that because it's a money issue, right? Because the threat is don't do this and your money dries up. Okay, now I don't have that kind of money to do that. I'm not that kind of lobbyist. I don't do that. I'm guessing none of y'all here are probably millionaires. If you are, we need to talk. Otherwise, that kind of activism doesn't work for us, and we don't want it to work. That's not the way it's supposed to work, right? So the other effective thing that they care about is not so much an appeal to do the right thing as much as, oh, you know what? There are enough people who are dedicated enough on this issue to affect my election next time around. Okay, if one person or even 5 or 10 people are dedicated enough to pick up the phone and make a phone call that lasts about 30 seconds, do those people pose a threat for their next election? I don't think so, right? Because those people will probably do exactly the same thing during election. They'll probably pick up the phone, put a quick Facebook post out that reaches about 20 people that says, I don't like this person because they didn't do this thing. It's not going to be a drop in the bucket for their next election. So they realize they can, if they only have 5 or 10 phone calls, maybe even 20 or 30 phone calls, and then no more action on it, they realize, you know what, that's not really going to affect my election next time. However, if they have 10, 20, 30 people from their district who know the process well enough and are dedicated enough to drop what they're doing on 3 days' notice, come all the way to Austin, hang out there, understand how to do this, they're brave enough to get up there and speak for 2 or 3 minutes, at that point, yes, it kind of matters what they say, because if they act like stupid people and they don't have any credible things to say, they realize, oh, they're not going to have anything against me in elections. But if they're credible and they're saying logical things and they present themselves professionally, those people pose a very real threat to the legislators' next election. Because if they put that much effort into, getting somebody else elected, especially in the primary, they can primary them. They realize that these people they could actually lose their election over just that few number of people putting in exactly that same amount of effort during elections. So I believe that's a huge way that it makes a difference. Another anecdotal example. I attended a town hall meeting 4 or 5 years ago where a newly elected legislator, several legislators, some new elected, some not, were having a discussion with Texas Tribune. And I raised my hand and asked a question about an hour into it. There were a lot of people asking questions. I raised my hand and I asked him, what do you think about constitutional carry? Very simple question. And I made a Facebook post about it, and I went on my way, and I kind of forgot about it. Well, then I also testified on certain gun bills. That legislator was on the committee for some of these bills, and so he heard me testify. I didn't have any other personal interaction with this legislator. I didn't have a meeting with him at all until recently. I reached out with my new role with GOA, and I scheduled a meeting. And I walk into the meeting. Not only does he know exactly who I am and who I'm working for, which is understandable because I made the meeting in that role, he remembers me showing up in my grassroots role. Like, he knew who I was exactly. He quoted some of my testimony that I'd said during hearings. He remembered the bills I'd come in on. He remembered my asking that question at that town hall. And it's all about that, having that face time in a public forum where you can call them out if you need to, or where you're having that dialogue. To me, that speaks a lot, because I could have called his office 500 times. I guarantee you he wouldn't know who I was. Staff would just write me down as a number and leave it alone. So does that help answer the question?
Yeah, I believe it does. He would. There's kind of a question or two here that kind of wrap together with what you were just saying. One is from Russell about like what when you have a piece of legislation that you as gun owners of America or someone with no fault divorce or eliminate property tax wants to get introduced. First off, what methods have you found that best give you the approach to them of sponsoring such legislation? And then kind of with what you were just speaking on, the impact of getting to their voters in their districts once they say, hey, no, or to sponsorship, or they veto it in committee, vote it down in committee. What are some of the ways that, first off, you can get them to sponsor your legislation and then impact them for not prioritizing it?
Okay, so we're definitely moved on to completely different things. I do have one more section I need to finish up here, and then I'll take any questions on anything. Let me answer that one, and then let's get back to the actual substance. Finish that out, and then I can take any other questions. So, how do you get somebody to sponsor legislation? It's going to be different for every issue. Like it depends on so many different factors. It depends on if it's a popular issue, if it's not a popular issue, if it's a major bill that a lot of people are going to hate. And you're going to bring out all these organizations who hate it, or if it's just something that kind of nobody cares about. You're going to approach all of those really differently. But basically, I mean, my approach is always, I've typically worked on bills that are major. I don't waste my time working on little things that I don't think are going to have much impact. I don't believe in that approach. I push for the big things that actually really are going to matter, and because of that, usually there are people who hate them. And so my approach has always been getting a ton of grassroots support. So showing that, hey, we have, if I put an action alert, I can get hundreds, if not thousands, of people to actually pick up the phone and make a call and send an email. And I know I keep on saying that's not as effective as testifying, but having huge numbers of people do that at the beginning also shows support. And you can do that, if nobody has filed a bill on something, you can put an action alert saying, please call your legislators and ask them to file a bill for this thing. Are they all going to file a bill? No. If they did, that's fine still. But at least they realize, hey, this is an important issue people care about. So that's something you can definitely do. And then just do your research and look up bills on similar subjects, maybe bills that didn't go as far but covered similar material in previous sessions. You can do that exact same search I showed you how to do and find those bills and see who signed on to those bills, and if they're still in office, start by calling them. And when all else fails, just start down the list and call all 150 representatives and ask to meet with them or meet with their legislative staff and feel them out for their interest on things. There's not a surefire way to make sure something happens. It's lobbying work. It's a lot of time and effort, and try to be strategic and pick up on signals from people. Realize that most of the time when you go to a legislator's office, they're never going to tell you no straight up, even if the answer is no. Usually they'll put you off and say maybe there's interest and maybe this and maybe that, and that's just their way of being diplomatic about saying no when they don't have to go on record saying no. So try to kind of cut through the nonsense and realize when they're just giving you BS and you need to move on. But that's kind of the scoop of things that I have for you there. With that, let's go ahead and move on to delivering testimony. This will be my final major segment, and then I'll be happy to take any questions on anything related to this stuff. So, delivering testimony. The tips are going to be: have one thing, make sure you know it really well, and make sure you deliver it well. So, what do I mean by that? Okay, like I referred to before. You can have a lot of different reasons for something. Like for constitutional carry, I might have 10 reasons or 20 reasons. I would be really dumb to get up there and try to fully convince them of all my reasons. I would also be dumb to get up there and just list out my reasons without giving any proof of them. So if you have 2 or 3 minutes, say 2 minutes, you have time to convince them of one thing. So think about what one thing you could make them believe. It might be some like crystallization that pulls several things together. But I always write down the top of my testimony page. It's like 5 words. One thing I want them to know. whatever that is in your head. One thing you want them to know. And then I try to come up with maybe 3 reasons, or maybe a reason, an example, a statistic. I might start with a statistic and say, well, here's a statistic, a fact that goes with it, and you can look in your handout for more statistics such as these, or you can look in your handout for the reference on that and where that comes from. And that way I'm giving the proof, but I'm not wasting my testimony time telling them all the where the research comes from. But they can look at my handout and see more information and more statistics. I'm just giving them one that I feel like is the most important for them to get. If I give them 5, their eyes are going to glaze over. They're not going to comprehend any of them. If I give them 1, they're going to comprehend it a lot better. So give them that one thing, then give them the statistic, give them the story about it, give them the other reason. Your supporting reasons, your supporting stories, but it's all pointing back to that one central theme. You have to have that one theme, that one central theme in your testimony. Know it and deliver it. And then let's see. Know the beginning and know the end very well. That's when people are generally the shakiest, is at the beginning, just getting going. And then at the end, if you didn't pace yourself correctly, you might run out of time. Or if you got goofed up and you added a bunch of extra words, if you're running out of time, it's important to jump to that end, finish strong with your intended ending. And so just be able to know, hey, I have 10 seconds left. Let me give my last 10 seconds strong. And then stop when it's over. Don't try to keep talking when the timer goes off, because that just makes you look dumb and you don't add any benefit to that. And if you're wondering, can I really speak to this issue? You know what? If you are a Texan and you have an opinion, yes, you can speak to it. You are a constituent of somebody in Texas. You are invited to give your opinion. This is not a courtroom. You are not required to prove every single fact you say absolutely definitively. Obviously, make sure it's true, but you don't have to be the one to present all the proof of everything. It's fine to just get up there and say, you know what? I want you to do this thing. I'm your constituent. Please do this thing because I want you to, because I think it's good. And that's, at the end of the day, that's actually okay. If you are the one who is most qualified to give your own opinion to the Texas legislators. I used to say that years ago. I'd be like, all those lobbyists, they shouldn't be listening to them. They should be listening to you because you're the ones most qualified. Today, I am a lobbyist. I am the grassroots lobbyist in the Capitol, and I'm still going to say the same thing to you. You are the ones most qualified to make your own opinion known, not me. It's you. So get up there and do it.